The snowstorm on Christmas Eve came down in sheets, swallowing the city in white. Evan Blake stormed out of his company's charity gala with his jaw clenched and his heart burning. Another argument with the board. Another night of feeling like a machine instead of a man. He felt used, misunderstood, and painfully, achingly alone. As he stepped into the icy wind, a small figure collided with him. A little girl no more than 6 stumbled backward, her cookie tin falling from her hands and scattering broken pieces onto the snow. Her mother apologized immediately, but the little girl crouched down, gathering the crumbs with tiny, careful fingers. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice soft and bright. "I can share the rest with you." Evan froze. People rarely spoke to him without wanting something. No one ever offered anything without expectation. Yet here was this little stranger, offering the last broken pieces of her Christmas cookies as if he mattered. She looked up at him and smiled in a way that pierced straight through his carefully built walls. "You look lonely," she said simply. "Want to come have a party at my place?" And for the first time in years, Evan felt something warm cut through the cold. If stories of unexpected kindness warm your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Love is Kindness. Evan Blake had not always been this closed-off man. There was a time when Christmas meant warmth, laughter, a home filled with light. But grief had stripped all of that away. 3 Christmases ago, he lost the person who made every holiday meaningful. And since then, he had buried himself in work to avoid the pieces of his life that still hurt to touch. He avoided gatherings, avoided joy, avoided anything that might remind him of who he used to be. Tonight was no different. He walked out of the gala, angry at the world, and even angrier at himself. His deepest fear whispered constantly that he was becoming a man who felt nothing. Then, there was Mia Carter, the little girl who saw straight through him. She lived simply, joyfully, in a world shaped by her mother's sacrifices. Full of hope, she believed kindness was the answer to everything. She noticed sadness the way others noticed snowflakes, gently, instantly, with instinctive compassion. Her mother, Rebecca Carter, hurried to help pick up the cookie tin fragments, apologizing for Mia's boldness. She was tired but warm-hearted, working 2 jobs, doing everything she could to make Christmas magical despite their small means. Behind her soft smile, she hid her own heartbreak, one she refused to let Mia carry. 3 lives crossing in a snowstorm, 3 stories already tugging toward one another. Evan walked away, his expensive shoes crunching against the snow, trying to shake off the strange warmth that little girl had stirred inside him. But a feeling tugged at him, gentle, persistent, impossible to ignore. He turned back. Mia stood there with her cookie tin pressed to her chest, waving at him with a smile wide enough to melt the ice he'd built around himself. Before he knew why, before he could talk himself out of it, he followed her and Rebecca down the quiet street. Rebecca hesitated when she noticed him behind them, unsure whether to let a stranger into their small world. But Mia tugged her hand and whispered, "He needs Christmas too." And so, with a cautious nod, she opened the door. The apartment he stepped into was small, modest, worn in places, but filled with warmth. Handmade ornaments hung from a tiny tree. Paper snowflakes covered the walls. A single string of lights glowed softly, filling the room with more heart than most mansions he'd visited. Evan stood there, breath catching in his chest. It wasn't luxury. It wasn't grandeur. It was belonging, something he hadn't felt in years. And now I ask you, if a little girl invited you in out of pure kindness, would you have walked away or followed the feeling? Inside the warm, cluttered apartment, Evan Blake looked wildly out of place. His polished suit, pristine coat, and rigid posture seemed almost comical in a room filled with mismatched cushions, handmade decorations, and the gentle scent of cinnamon. He tried to blend in, but the stiffness in his shoulders gave him away. Years of walls didn't disappear in a single evening. Mia, however, paid no attention to boundaries or social expectations. She plopped onto the couch beside him, swinging her tiny legs, studying him with innocent curiosity. "Why are you sad?" she asked simply, as if it were the most natural question in the world. "Where's your family?" Evan's throat tightened. No board member, no colleague, no friend had ever dared ask him those questions. He cleared his throat, deflecting with a vague, "I'm fine," and a small, brittle smile. Rebecca watched from the kitchen doorway, noticing the discomfort in his eyes, the way he looked everywhere except directly at his own pain. She didn't push him. She only offered quiet compassion, letting him stay without demanding explanations. Evan's expensive watch glimmered against the soft glow of Christmas lights. His manner was polished, practiced, yet his sadness clung to him like the snow melting on his coat. The contrast between him and the Carter home was stark. Their world was simple, warm, imperfect, and his was sharp, cold, and controlled. He tried opening up once or twice, only to stop himself when grief pressed too close to the surface. His voice faltered, his hands stilled, his gaze drifted toward the floor. But Mia noticed every crack in his armor. Without hesitation, she placed her small hand on his arm and whispered, "It's okay. You can be sad at my party." The words slipped through everything he'd been holding back. Evan nearly broke. Mia decided that Evan was officially a guest of honor. She grabbed a paper Christmas crown she'd made earlier, crooked, glittery, taped unevenly, and placed it on his head with the authority of someone who believed magic could fix anyone. He looked ridiculous. Rebecca tried not to laugh. Mia didn't try at all. Rebecca poured the last cup of hot chocolate and, without hesitation, handed it to Evan. "No one should be cold on Christmas," she said softly. Evan took it, warmed not just by the drink but by the gesture. People rarely gave him anything without expecting something in return. When Mia struggled to close her dented cookie tin, Evan knelt to help her. Together they pressed the bent edges back into shape until it clicked shut. Mia beamed, declaring him a Christmas hero. A sound escaped him, then soft, uncertain, unfamiliar, a laugh. The first one he had allowed to slip free in years. Something shifted in the room. Evan began to remember what joy felt like, the quiet kind, the kind that didn't demand anything from him. Rebecca watched him with growing warmth, seeing not the CEO the world praised, but the gentle, broken man trying to find his way back to himself. Mia, in her innocent certainty, grew attached instantly. She started calling him Mr. Lonely Smile, a nickname that made Evan blink with something between amusement and heartbreak. Their worlds, so different, so unlikely, began blending into a rhythm that felt suspiciously like family. Just when the evening felt steady and warm, Evan's phone buzzed sharply. He glanced at the screen, expecting a trivial message, but his expression darkened. A leak had hit the media. Headlines blamed him for a failed charity project his board had mismanaged. Investors were calling. Critics were circling. Rumors were spreading like wildfire. He felt betrayed again, exposed again, alone always. Old self-doubt surged back, swallowing the fragile joy he had allowed himself. He stood abruptly, muttering that he needed to go, that he didn't belong there, that he shouldn't have come at all. Mia's face fell. Rebecca's heart tightened. Evan moved toward the door as if running from the warmth frightened him more than the cold outside. Mia ran after him, tears filling her eyes. "You said you'd stay," she whispered, her voice cracking. Rebecca said nothing, but the quiet heartbreak in her eyes was impossible to miss, and Evan walked out into the snow feeling more lost than he had when he walked in. Evan stepped into the storm, letting the snow swallow him whole. The warmth of the Carter home faded behind him, replaced by the familiar cold he was used to carrying. He told himself leaving was the right thing, that people like him didn't belong in gentle places. But then he heard footsteps crunching through the snow. Mia caught up to him, breathless, cheeks red from the cold. She held out a folded piece of paper with both hands, her eyes shining with something he didn't dare name. "Don't forget this," she whispered. Before he could respond, she ran back toward the apartment, leaving him standing in the quiet storm. Evan reached his car, trembling not from the cold, but from something deeper. He unfolded the paper slowly. Inside was a child's drawing of 3 figures: him, Rebecca, and Mia standing beside a crooked Christmas tree. Their hands were joined, their smiles were wide. Above them, written in uneven crayon, were the words, "You can be in our family tonight." The breath left his lungs. The grief he had buried for years cracked open. He pressed the drawing to his chest as sobs shook him raw, uncontrollable, the kind he hadn't allowed himself since the night he lost his wife. And in that moment, he realized the truth he had been running from. He had left the only place where he felt alive. Evan didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He simply turned the car around and drove back through the snow as fast as his shaking hands would allow. When Rebecca opened the door, she froze, shock, relief, and uncertainty flickering across her face. Evan stood there, breathless, clutching Mia's drawing like it was the only thing holding him together. His voice trembled as he spoke. "I'm tired," he confessed. "Tired of running from life, from feeling, from connection." Mia darted forward, wrapping her arms around his legs with pure joy. "You came back," she squealed. Evan knelt to hug her, closing his eyes as if anchoring himself to that tiny warmth. Then he looked up at Rebecca, his guard completely shattered. "You're home," he whispered. "Felt like a life I didn't know I could still have." Rebecca's eyes softened, filled with a tenderness she hadn't shown anyone in a long time. She stepped aside, letting him in, not just into the apartment, but into something deeper. They sat together at the small table, sharing a Christmas dinner simple in ingredients but rich in something far more important. Mia hummed carols as she ate, her voice floating through the room like a promise of brighter days. For the first time since his wife died, Evan spoke about her, not the sanitized version he gave to colleagues, but the real memories, the messy grief, the love that never fully faded. Rebecca listened quietly, offering him space to honor what he had lost without forcing him to hide it. And as he spoke, something within him loosened. The weight he carried felt lighter. The silence around his grief finally broke. Evan looked around the tiny apartment, at Mia giggling over a cookie crumb, at Rebecca watching him with gentle understanding, and he realized he had found something he never expected to feel again. Something healing, something warm, something real. When the night softened into quiet warmth, Evan rose from the table with a kind of reluctance he hadn't felt in years. For the first time since he arrived, he wasn't running, he was holding on. He looked at Rebecca, then at Mia, and something inside him steadied. He asked, gently but with surprising vulnerability, if they could stay in each other's lives, if this night didn't have to end as just a moment, but as the beginning of something they could choose together. Rebecca's cheeks warmed with a shy smile. She nodded, hope flickering in her eyes, soft and brave. "Yes," she whispered, "I'd like that." Mia didn't hesitate for a second. She threw her arms in the air and shouted, "We're your Christmas family now." The sound of her delight filled the room, and Evan laughed, really laughed, rich and full, the kind of sound that comes from someone who has finally found a piece of themselves again. If stories of unexpected love and healing move you, don't forget to subscribe to Love is Kindness for more heartwarming tales. Weeks later, Evan found himself returning to the Carter home more often than he ever expected. Mia made him handmade cards covered in glitter and crooked hearts. Rebecca grew closer to him with a gentle steadiness, no rush, no pressure, just 2 adults learning to trust warmth again. And Evan finally felt alive, not because of work, not because of success, but because he had found people who saw him, not the CEO, not the billionaire, but the man who had been quietly hurting for far too long. He walked into Christmas alone, and walked out with a family he never knew he needed. And now, I'd love to know what moment in this story touched your heart the most.